You never do anything spontaneous. Those were the words spoken to the then 36-year-old Acacia Oudinot by her friend before she went on a date with Wilson Jackson, the man who would consume the next few years of her life for all the wrong reasons. Oudinot's life truly changed when she received a friend request and a follow-up Facebook message from Jackson. On the surface, Jackson seemed like a genuine guy. He wore nice clothes in his pictures, and they even shared 4 mutual friends. His expression on the photos oozed charm, intelligence, and confidence. Jackson's message was, "What's up, beautiful?" Confirm these impressions. "What's up, beautiful" wasn't an uncommon first message for Oudinot to find in her DMs. It's a message that she's used to getting. Nevertheless, Jackson stuck out like a well-dressed, confident thumb. To his "What's up, beautiful," Oudinot responded with a suspicious "hello," but it was enough to get a response from Jackson. He continued the Facebook message convo with Oudinot for several weeks before asking her on a date. During those weeks, Oudinot became close to Jackson. She found out he wasn't a catfish after they FaceTimed on a few occasions. They spoke on the phone, talking about their mutual love of sports, particularly football. Jackson asked her about the 9 years she served in the Air Force, and Oudinot answered, telling him all about her time abroad. Jackson listened to every word. In fact, Oudinot got the impression that he cared about her, especially when he offered to fly Oudinot from her home in Scottsdale, Arizona, out to his house in LA for Christmas. Oudinot's original plans were to spend Christmas with her best friend, but the plans were canceled at the last minute. Now, left with no holiday plans, Oudinot was still on the fence about accepting Jackson's offer. This was not something she'd normally do. Oudinot's friend eventually convinced her to let Jackson buy her a ticket to LA and finally do something spontaneous. Oudinot packed her things and left for the airport. Earlier, Jackson sent Oudinot a screenshot of the boarding pass he'd bought for her. Everything seemed to be in order. Not to mention, Oudinot had finally found someone she liked who could meet her expectations. However, when she got to the airport, employees said her ticket was invalid. Oudinot, assuming something must have gone wrong during the purchasing process, called Jackson to get things sorted out. But when Jackson answered the phone, he didn't offer a solution. Instead, he insisted the ticket must be valid. Oudinot explained that the flight would leave soon and she needed a ticket to LA pronto. So Jackson instructed Oudinot to buy a ticket at the airport. He promised to pay her back when she got to LA, and to prove something was going on with the ticket he initially bought, Jackson sent Oudinot screenshots of him dealing with the bank. Oudinot says she proceeded to buy a ticket to LA and boarded the plane. Her plane landed at LAX in the late hours of the night. Jackson picked her up and took her to the movies. Oudinot recalls how he was in person just as charming, fun, and kind as he seemed on FaceTime. Jackson asked her about Oudinot's future, her career aspirations, and any wild, crazy dreams she harbored. In the morning, like a true gentleman, he cooked her breakfast, a classic combination of bacon and eggs. After they ate breakfast, Jackson took Oudinot back to the airport. On Monday, her second full day back home, Oudinot noticed over $3,000 was missing from her bank account. Oudinot scanned her card's transaction history and discovered where the purchases were made. The largest transaction was a $2,500 transfer to another account. The other 2 payments for a plane ticket and items at a fast food restaurant. All the money charges were billed from California. Oudinot knew exactly who had used her card. So, not long after seeing the charges, Oudinot filed a police report against Jackson. She wanted Jackson apprehended as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the police didn't share her desire for revenge. When Oudinot called the Scottsdale police, they deferred her to the Los Angeles police, who boomeranged Oudinot right back to Scottsdale police, telling her she'd have to file her report with them. Most people would give up, as $3,000 might not be a big deal. But Oudinot didn't care about the money. Instead of moving on, Oudinot started her own investigation into Jackson. Jackson had already blocked her number, so asking her suspect questions over the phone was not an option. With no prior background in research, Oudinot began investigating Jackson. She started with the basics. Where did Jackson live? Even though she'd been to his house, Oudinot couldn't remember Jackson's address, and without his address, finding Jackson would be very difficult. She couldn't find any home addresses linked to the purchases on her bank statement, but she did find the address of the fast food restaurant. After finding the restaurant address, Oudinot searched every apartment complex in the area, and with the help of her memory, found the apartment complex she stayed at with Jackson. She remembered Jackson taking her to a tall building, so tall that they had to park in an underground parking garage. So Oudinot narrowed her search to tall apartment buildings with underground garages. She also remembered being close to a movie theater on a noisy LA street. Using these very specific criteria, Oudinot found a potential match. Just to be sure it was the building she stayed at, the rookie sleuth looked up the floor plans, then based on her memory of walking through the rooms and hallways, determined this was the place. Oudinot called the building's phone number and asked the clerk if a resident named Will Jackson lived there. The clerk said no, and Oudinot felt a dreadful epiphany wash over her. Will Jackson was not his real name. Oudinot kept digging. She used methods she initially learned from MTV's Catfish, such as reverse Google image searches on Jackson's Facebook page. Eventually, one of those reverse searches yielded a link to a social media account under a different name. The account had an email written in the bio. Oudinot dug deeper into the email account and discovered it belonged to someone named Sincere Jackson. Oudinot kept digging and Googled the name. The results were mostly unrelated, except for one article. The article was small, only 85 words, but it contained some vital info on Jackson. Oddly enough, the article's publisher was from Orlando, a local paper called the West Orlando News. In 2011, the Orlando News published an article on Jackson, saying that the police department were searching for victims willing to come forward and testify against Jackson. Alongside the victim's story was a mugshot of Jackson, who Oudinot easily recognized. The real question was, who are these victims? And what did Jackson do to them? Was it similar to what he did to her? Detective Oudinot would soon find out. In 2007, a Florida woman who gave reporters the alias SHONDA Porter dated Jackson. She described him as a snake who could shed his skin on command and become anyone he needed to be. But that isn't how Jackson saw himself. Porter dated Jackson long enough to notice a large tattoo on his back, written in bold, daring letters, "Outlaw." Oudinot would later discover, after some more online sleuthing, that Jackson grew up as anything but an outlaw. According to public records, Jackson was born in Daytona Beach, Florida. Contrary to his tattoo, Jackson was raised in a conservative Christian household. Growing up, he did everything he could to escape his family's culture. As a young man, Jackson attempted to start a rap career under the name Da Truth. However, Da Truth wasn't very good. Jackson spent his early years bouncing around Florida, mainly between Tallahassee and Orlando, all the while claiming to his many girlfriends he was playing football and writing bars. In reality, Jackson was learning how to scam people, specifically successful young women on social media and dating apps. These girls saw Jackson the same way Oudinot had. Handsome, well-dressed, tall, fit-looking man with charm to impress even the most skeptical women. He used these attributes to lure dozens of women into trusting him. After contacting other victims and hearing their stories, Oudinot discovered Jackson's operation. She also realized how similar her story was to other victims. On a basic level, all the other victims, including Oudinot, had a few common experiences. They were contacted by Jackson, usually online, talked with him for a while, then he asked them for a favor or some kind of big purchase with the promise of reimbursement, after which Jackson would either not pay them back or steal their bank information and disappear, seemingly without a trace, until he met Oudinot, of course. She was the only victim who cared enough to track him down. In fact, no one did more than her in finding so-called Will Jackson, whose birth name was Wilson Edward Jackson. However, he used the name Sincere often, which is why Oudinot had such a tough time finding him. But when she did, Oudinot finally saw how extensive Jackson's scamming truly was. Before she continued her research on the other victims, Oudinot contacted a professional, then 55-year-old LAPD detective Stephanie Kratchier. By 2018, when Oudinot reached out to her, Detective Kratchier had been investigating Jackson for a while, ever since the charming scam artist had moved to LA back in 2014. Oudinot could not arrest Jackson herself, but Kratchier could. The Scottsdale sleuth presented Kratchier with all the evidence she collected so far and convinced the LA detective that Jackson needed to be arrested immediately. Kratchier, however, had a lot on her plate. The city of Angels was filled with scamming demons, and small-scale scams like Jackson's were not a number one priority. Nevertheless, the overworked and overwhelmed detective promised Oudinot she would arrest Jackson as soon as possible. Oudinot hung up the phone feeling confident that Kratchier would take care of the arrest. In the meantime, however, Oudinot could not let the case go. So far, Kratchier only had 8 victims who'd reported Jackson to the authorities. Oudinot was determined to find more. Oudinot got to work quickly. She started using the very app Jackson used to contact her to look for other victims in Florida and California. The posts worked, and Oudinot started talking to several other victims from the 2 states. She even put them in touch with one another, creating a network of Jackson victims who could talk about their experiences. Crashier found 8 victims during years of investigation. Oudinot found 10 victims in just 1 month. These women, mostly African American in their 30s, told each other how Jackson humiliated them. Though many of the victims shared their stories with other victims, most were reluctant to give their names to the media out of embarrassment. They all wanted to see some form of justice, though. Crashier promised Oudinot an arrest, with the deadline being April 2018. But after traveling to Afghanistan for a few months to work as a civilian air traffic controller, Oudinot looked at the calendar and noticed the month was January. The year? 2019. Oudinot, in her extensive research, remembered reading how Jackson had gotten away. Most of the escapes were made possible by lazy investigators and prosecutors. Oudinot couldn't let another detective leave him under a pile of other cases. So she gave Crashier an ultimatum: arrest Jackson, or Oudinot would file a complaint on the veteran detective who was set to retire any day now. Crashier chose the harder option and looked up Jackson on her computer. She found a warrant in his name for grand theft auto and sent a team of officers to bring him in. Jackson was arrested on May 23, 2019 in Los Angeles. He was taken into police custody and hired a lawyer, but the lawyer left after Jackson's check bounced. His public defender convinced him to plead not guilty despite over 60 women coming forward to testify against him on 33 felony charges. In total, Jackson is believed to have collected over $200,000 from his victims, including Oudinot. Sadly, they'll never get that money back. But they can enjoy knowing that Jackson's face and reputation were smeared across news media outlets like Newsweek, The Daily Beast, and several local LA outlets. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comments section if you think girls that use guys for free dinners, even though they know they don't like them, should be a scam or not.